together to defend our liberty and unity. All sons and daughters of Africa, flesh of the sun and flesh of the sky, let us make Africa a tree of life. Let us all unite and sing together to uphold the bonds that frame our destiny. Let us dedicate ourselves to fight together for lasting peace and justice on earth. All sons and daughters of Africa, flesh of the sun and flesh of the sky, let us make Africa the tree of life. Let us all unite and toil together to give the best we have to Africa, the cradle of mankind and font of culture, our pride and hope at break of dawn. All sons and daughters of Africa, flesh of the sun and flesh of the sky, let us make Africa the tree of life.
A very good morning and a warm welcome to all the viewers on the Facebook Live platforms of Namibia Media Holdings. My name is Denver Kisting. It's Friday, the 29th of May 2020. It's a bit of a chilly but a beautiful Friday morning in the Namibian capital. Less than 48 hours ago, our brand new Minister of Finance, Iipumbu Shiimi, delivered his maiden budget speech in the National Assembly Wednesday afternoon. Now, this unenviable and very daunting task he delivered and executed with incredible grace and eloquence. Why is it daunting? Why was it unenviable? We know there's one common invisible enemy, not only in Namibia, but across the globe, called COVID-19. So in collaboration with our strategic partners, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Standard Bank and Liberty, as well as the NCCI, we will be hosting the Minister today for his first interview following Wednesday afternoon's event. The Minister is in studio with us, and shortly he will deliver a keynote address just to touch on exactly what transpired Wednesday afternoon and perhaps also share some of the details in terms of implementation. Thereafter, we'll have a panel discussion hosted by Ms. Chantal Hesselman, tax leader at PricewaterhouseCoopers Namibia. She'll be engaging Mr. Vitumboy Mungunda, the Chief Executive Officer of Standard Bank Namibia, as well as Ms. Charity Muya, the CEO of the NCCI, on the budget. Thereafter, I'll have the distinct honor and privilege to engage the Minister on a few questions one-on-one. He has asked me to take it slightly easy on him. I cannot make that undertaking as yet. We'll have to see how that unfolds. Following that engagement, we'll have Ms. Monique Kluter. She's the Managing Director at Liberty Namibia, for a vote of thanks. We'd like to ask you to please share this broadcast, please comment constructively, and let's hear what the Minister has to say today. Please stay tuned.
Good morning, fellow Namibians. Let me thank the organizers of this event, Standard Bank Namibia, PwC, Liberty, and NCC, and of course our host, the Namibia Media Holding, for organizing this very, very important event. I believe most of you had an opportunity to listen to my budget speech on Wednesday, the 27th of May. And I'm not going to repeat what I have said there, but I will give you a quick summary of what is contained in the budget. You are all aware that we are facing very unprecedented difficult times. Beginning of February this year, the whole world, of course starting with China in December last year, with the discovery of COVID-19, which affected the whole world from China to Africa negatively. And as a result, the global economy changed completely in February this year. And because of that negative consequence of COVID-19, the Namibian economy has also been equally affected because we are no longer able to sell the exports of our goods and also services, our commodities. Prices have declined. We had to introduce restrictions, and unfortunately those restrictions also somewhat severely affected economic activities in Namibia. So it's in that context that the budget was presented. And of course, the message that we have in the budget is that together we can this war. We can defeat COVID together. We can thrive again. That's the theme of that budget, of the budget that I presented on the 27th of May. Now, the main focus of the budget, of course, is to support lives by making sure that enough resources have been allocated to social sectors, especially to the health sector. So the health ministry has received an additional amount of 727 million on top of what they usually receive. The Ministry of Education has also received an additional allocation to cope with the health protocols that they will have to institute in schools because of COVID. It is no longer a normal situation. There has to be social distancing. We need to make sure that there is enough water and sanitation. So hence the additional resources that have been allocated to education. With health, of course, you know that we need to buy protective equipments, We need to make sure that we have enough facilities so that we can treat our fellow Namibians who will fall victim to this virus. Hence the additional resources that have been put or have been made available for these three sectors of the economy. But on top of that, we had to make sure that basic state functions will continue. Of course, we'll not be able to perform at optimum capacity because we don't have enough resources for everything. But we had to make sure that enough resources are made available for the other basic functions of the state to continue. Now, that's on the expenditure side. On the revenue side, because of the constrained activity in the economy, as I have said, revenue have fallen, our exports have fallen, and therefore, as a result, our tax revenue is severely constrained. So you have a situation of where revenue is falling, expenditure is increasing because we have to fight COVID, and therefore the gap between revenue and expenditure has widened. Hence, the deficit of 12.4% of GDP. Obviously, this is unprecedented. As I said, the situation itself is unprecedented. That trend should not be allowed to continue, and hence our commitment that we as Namibians, this is a time that we have to come together as one Namibia, one nation, work together and take the necessary or undertake the necessary reforms that we have to undertake. We have to tighten our belts. We have to endure this pain because we need to come out of this crisis stronger. And we as government, we are committing to undertake that pain by looking at the reform programs. We need to make sure that the economy becomes more competitive. We need to make sure that we spend money on more efficiently and more sparingly. So we need to go back to the drawing board and look at our expenditure items. Where do we spend a lot of money without generating the necessary outcome that we want to generate? So I have announced that we are going to look at things like the government medical aid scheme. It has been escalating, or the cost thereof has been escalating. We need to relook at our wage bill. Obviously, we have to do it in a responsible manner so that we don't have people who are going to lose further jobs, because job losses is already something that we are trying to mitigate. It's already happening in the economy because of constrained economic activities, especially in sectors such as tourism and aviation. So we will have to make sure that by containing the wage bill in government, we do not add another oil to the fire, but we have to do it in a responsible manner, in a sustainable manner, so that we can reverse the trend of putting more money in wages and saving some money for other basic economic functions, especially those that are going to improve our capacity to produce more goods and services in the future, create employment, and of course create revenue that will enable us to have capacity to pay back the money that we are borrowing to fill the gap. So, but all this will become more clear as we move along. We have started with our reform programs. As I promised in the budget statement, that by October we'll give more details as to how much progress we are making in terms of addressing some of these reforms. Of course, many of these reforms will take time. They are not easily implementable, especially in the short period of time. But what is important is that we need to start right away. So, but this calls for everybody, all Namibians. In the private sector, we'll have to work as government, to work very closely with the private sector. In the media sector, the communication sector, we all need to communicate the messages that are coming from the dialogue between different sectors of the economy. The non-governmental organizations, non-state actors, everybody has to make a contribution to make Namibia a better place, so that when the world economy stabilizes, when COVID-19 is defeated, we emerge as a stronger country that is going to take advantage of the situation and make the economy stronger so that we can all thrive again. So therefore, as I said, I'm not going to repeat what I said before. The only thing that only thing I wanted to emphasize is that unity of purpose is going to save us. We have heard the Namibian anthem now. It says, we as Namibians, we love thee. I think this is now the time that we really need to show that love by working together. I thank you.
Good morning to our viewers. As introduced, I'm Chantel Esselman, PwC Tax Leader, and this morning I am joined in studio by experts from the industry, the MD of Standard Bank Namibia, Mr. Mungunda. Welcome, Mr. Mungunda.
Thank you very much.
I'm also joined by the Chief Executive Officer of the Namibian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Welcome, Mrs. Muya, for joining us in studio this morning.
Thank you very much, Chantel.
To our viewers, yes, the budget as tabled Wednesday has focused on a strong COVID theme, focused on saving lives, livelihoods, jobs, income, and just putting Namibia in a better position in the nearby future. So I've had the opportunity to dissect the budget with the aid of my colleague Johan Nel on Wednesday evening. That information has been covered in the NMH newspaper since yesterday and is still readily available on the websites of PwC Namibia and NMH. And to those only joining the conversation this morning, do stay online as we continue with the dialogue on getting industry expert views on the economy, but also the impact of the pandemic. So Mr. Mungunda, as a start to the conversation, there are fears of the COVID-19 induced recession, not just in Namibia, but globally as well. What is your reading of this impact on our economy, and how do you think this informed the budget as tabled?
Thank you very much. I think as the Honorable Minister stated a few minutes ago, recession in the global economy and in Namibia is no longer a speculation, but it is now a foregone conclusion. It is a reality. I think what will be different in the various countries is just the extent of the recession. Unfortunately, this is also not only an economic crisis. Essentially, it is an existential risk to humanity. The biggest crisis, as the Honorable Minister said, humanity has faced probably in the last 100 years. It can be seen as a choice. I think between a humanitarian crisis and economic crisis, because I think for the first time in many years, these crises are actually presenting themselves at the same time. There are unanswered questions that we believe are critical, and this talks to the duration of the outbreak in Namibia, or globally. Will this have been dealt with in the next 2 months, 3 months, or is it 6 months, or is it a year? And obviously that will inform the recovery period, the duration, and also the recovery path. So these are very difficult times. And if you look at the forecasted contraction for 2020, the Honorable Minister said 6.6%. That's a significant contraction that I think Namibia has not seen, probably ever. And so obviously for the Minister and for the budget, it was a difficult choice. You have a reduction in revenue. At the same time, you have an increase in expenditure. It is probably, it's the proverbial, a choice between a rock and a hard place, and it's a difficulty, I think, that the Minister had to...
It's with a 21 billion deficit.
Yes. Exactly, yeah.
So thank you for that. Definitely uncertain times, navigating a lot of grey. Ms. Muya, moving to your opening statement, as the national body representing business facility or fraternity in Namibia, what is your view on the impact of COVID on businesses, in particularly touching on the challenges that you came aware of that they experienced, not just our bigger corporates, but also smaller and medium enterprises?
Thank you very much, Chantel. I think for a start, it's a given that there is no business that has not been affected with this pandemic, whether small or big. But in terms of the smaller businesses, of course, and those that were still in the startup phase, those would actually have been hardest hit, because firstly, they did not have enough time or enough reserves to carry them through the tough times. That's very obvious. And then also you have, even those smaller businesses that were like maybe geared up, there is the challenge that obviously they would have debts that they need to service, and obviously affecting because of the cash flow. That is actually obviously the biggest challenge there. And then for the larger firms and the more established ones, one would say that probably maybe including corporates, that these would actually be able to survive. But the question is, for how long? Because you have a cash flow issue, you have all these challenges, then you have got employees that, especially when you're actually forced to ensure that you still keep your employees, but your operations are actually kind of restricted. So that's a big challenge actually. So yes, the impact is actually very obvious, and it's the question that as the private sector, the business body that is supporting the private sector, that we have called for concerted efforts, especially for patriotism among Namibians, to ensure that this is the time that we really have to ensure that we support local.
Yes.
Under any circumstances.
Support local at home,
yes,
definitely. So to the challenges as mentioned by Ms. Muya, we're all aware of a pandemic economic stimulus package that has been announced earlier this year already to the amount of 8.1 billion. To Mr. Mungunda, as a leader in the banking sector, do you believe that the measures as announced, and also taking into account the progress that's been tabled per the budget speech, that it's sufficient to cushion the economy from the impact of the induced recession?
Yeah, so the announcement, the 8 billion that you referred to, amounts to about 4.5% of GDP. But if you look at globally, most economies' packages that have been announced are in between 10 to 15% of GDP. So I think if you look at just that ratio, you'll probably realize that our package is probably on the lower side. Obviously, the reason why our package is lower is because we entered this crisis with lower savings and reserves as an economy and as a country. And also, we also entered the crisis with a relatively higher debt to GDP ratio. So obviously that really leaves us with a lot less fiscal capacity to be able to come a lot more aggressively and strongly to the rescue of businesses, of individuals that have been impacted. And I think maybe the key lesson for all of us is that we need to, as a country, spend a lot more effort into putting aside reserves, putting aside savings for the rainy days like what we currently have. This is, as the Honorable Minister said, this is a once in a lifetime type of crisis. And for those type of crises, you need to make sure that you are able to tap into your reserves. And unfortunately, we have not had enough reserves, I believe, to really make sure that we are able to go through this strongly. But I believe that the Minister has done what he could, has done very well in terms of really trying, being innovative around coming up with possible packages. Maybe the other thing as well is, I think if you look at the measures introduced by government, and particularly I think also by Bank of Namibia, through the reduction in interest rates, that is a huge package that I believe should be able to provide some room to individuals, to businesses, to be able to weather the storm. And also through the payment holidays that have been provided by the commercial banks, that will go a long way to try and help to support businesses that are impacted. But obviously what you don't have, unfortunately, is we need to make sure that this crisis, where it is currently an economic crisis, does not go to become a financial crisis, i.e. a liquidity crisis in the economy. And from what we are seeing between Bank of Namibia, the Ministry of Finance, and in conjunction with the banks, we believe that from all the indications are that we are able to stop the economic crisis to become a liquidity crisis. Because when it becomes a liquidity crisis, it becomes even more pronounced, because what you will have there is that where businesses are not able to access, for example, working capital and all of that, because the economy doesn't actually have any liquidity. And currently, we actually have sufficient liquidity in the economy at this point in time. And then looking at forecast as well, we believe that we'll be able to have still sufficient liquidity for a very foreseeable future. What we now need to unlock is the actual economic activities, where the lockdown is restricted, is uplifted, and normal trade, normal trade routes and supply chains have normalized. So when we can get that, then I think we should be able to go through this as best as possible.
Definitely, thank you.
Yeah. So maybe just that the crisis, I think, will be able to stop us from getting into a liquidity crisis, but it will not avert a recession. A recession is given.
Thank you, Mr. Manguna. Being closer to conversation with taxpayers on the economic stimulus package as announced, a comment I often get is almost 50% of the announced 8.1 billion is denoted to accelerating of paying out undisputed VAT refunds as well as settlement to government suppliers. The comment being, should that not have been already cash flow circulated or pumped back into the economy and not only when we are in a declared state of emergency. So I would leave that comment with Honourable Minister. Ms. Muya, moving to trade with our borders and our regional and global partners. There have been suggestions from the business community to remove import and export restrictions at the borders, but based on the contraction projected as indicated by Honourable Minister, where do you think we should draw the line between the safety of our citizens and having increased economic activity? Examples of this is where we've clearly seen a few incidents in the past few days of new COVID cases, primarily emerging from the transportation sector. Please share your thoughts on how to best handle this situation.
Thank you again. I think for a start, it's important to highlight that borders cannot be opened unilaterally. These are engagements that you also have to undertake with the neighbors, other neighboring countries, ensure that that is actually well managed. So, in as much as there is really the need to make sure that we up that, you will see that even most of the countries that we are trading with, the cases there are actually higher. And you as a country will be more concerned on how you're managing your own cases internally. You do not know what other economies are actually doing. So, and also to continue, one shouldn't really have to draw a line between the safety of citizens and the economic welfare of the country, because those two are really inseparable. And I think this is where we really need to make sure that the situation is well managed in terms of ensuring that our public health systems or the health systems that we actually put in place are actually also very much well controlled. This situation also calls for responsible citizenship. I don't think anybody who knows, irrespective of which sector that you are, because I think now there is all this stigma around, those people in that sector, because you think they are the ones that are really, crossing borders. And when they come, I think we have to up in terms of our education, because remember when the country went on lockdown, there was so much mobilization and information to all the citizens in terms of social distancing, prevention, measures and all that. But I think the focus has now been shifted. If you see the patterns now, updates of what is actually going on in a particular region and all of that, as opposed to us making sure that we still continue to ensure that the safety and the social distancing is actually maintained. We have called for the opening up of so many industries, but I think it also calls for a lot of personal responsibilities, Otherwise, if we continue the way we are doing, we will not be able to actually manage and contain the situation, if it gets worse. And you wouldn't want to be in a situation where, as we are, that the country goes again into complete lockdown because we are being responsible as citizens ourselves. So critically, we have seen that numbers of jobs are actually people being retrenched. It's a given, and I think this is cause really for serious concerted efforts from all parties, that we also need to make sure that we also understand that the business community itself, we don't actually there wanting to retrench people. But there also has to be some kind of higher level of support to this industry. Not just what has already been offered, because there's really nothing that says that there's actually no capital injection that has really gone into really serving businesses. It is what was already owed to the business that you're actually giving. And if you look especially with the allocation of the budget to the Line Ministry of Trade, if we are really serious about talking of entrepreneurial development, are we going to achieve that with that kind of allocation? Because that ministry, I think we would have actually thought that this is a time that you needed to really make sure that you also up it so that they can be able to also give incentives, particularly for this smaller sector of our economy. Yeah.
Yes, definitely tough times, and also tough times to our truck drivers, putting themselves out there and their lives at risks in bringing in essential goods to the country. Mr. Mungunda, maybe a tough question, but in your view, has the budget demonstrated the new fiscal focus areas to address the structural problems in the economy? Or can we say it's a missed opportunity?
I think there are certain points there that I think we need to maybe have had a look at. And when you look at the structural issues, you need to understand that we have had 4 years of recession before this crisis. The past 10 years have been characterized by massive increases in public spending, highly concentrated, particularly as the Honorable Minister stated, in the wage bill, with public debt growing from 12 billion in 2009 to about 117 billion, as we heard from the Honorable Minister. The increase in public debt has also been spent on infrastructure mostly as well, which did not yield returns because we have not seen that stimulus that will normally come from infrastructure spending, with many public contributions to government revenue. And also I think the other thing is the public enterprises as well absorbing quite significant amount of resources without improvement in performance or revenue generation for government. So we have some structural issues before COVID. And what I think, and also these other structural issues also clear in things like inequality, poverty, housing, and all of this. So it is quite a difficult thing. And I believe that what we have seen is what is not maybe coming through as strongly as it should is a shift in our spending patterns to reflect the changes that we would actually like to see coming through, that will reflect the type of structural reforms that we believe are needed at this point in time. I think there is a quote that I would like to use. In order to have a new idea, you have to first let go of an old idea. And I think that letting go of an old idea to then say what the new idea is not quite coming through, and that should not ideally should be coming through the spending patterns. So as an example, I think it still puzzles some of us why we spend so much on defense, safety and security, And also in an economic crisis like this, the combination of those two actually increases. The percentage allocation is about 18, 19%, actually amongst the highest in the world for a country that we say is at peace with itself and also with its neighbors. So, we have not seen announcements. I think the Honorable Minister said there will be some announcements about structural reforms, but maybe they have not, this would have been their time to really decisively come through and say,
Yes.
this is, these are the reforms that we are going to be doing, and this is how these are reflected in the budget at this point in time.
Thank you for that. I'll definitely borrow on letting go of the old, making room for the new.
Yeah.
The Namibia Statistics Agency has recently published a survey that accurately captures the impact on the different sectors of the Namibian economy induced by the pandemic. And the list is long of industries that has been impacted, touching on exports, tourism, retail, manufacturing, and construction. And where some of these industries had already been weathering an extended recession prior to being COVID impacted. Ms. Muya, what would you like to be part of the long-term rescue strategy for the Ministry of Finance in the next 2 to 3 years?
Well, first, I must say that the survey results of the NSA were predicted. And I believe that, however, NCC actually is delighted that the NSA initiative actually gives credence to what the NCCI and other private sector bodies have actually been warning, that obviously this pandemic will have bruising effects on the economy. But however, lessons needs to be drawn from what other, or best practice of what other economies are doing in terms of their stimulus packages. If you look at our neighboring South Africa there, or other neighboring countries, but also all those from further afields, what they have really done, I think it doesn't do us any harm to emulate those kind of practices. You'd understand that I think in the beginning, as NCCI, we have said that through our private sector COVID task team, we have actually put proposals towards the government. And I think even other sector associations like the Bankers Association, there were proposals that were put forth to government. And I think it's important that we probably enhance the consultation with the private sector and see how this actually can be done. As Mr. Mangunda said, the private sector is also concerned that the huge chunk has actually been allocated to the Ministry of Defense. And very little has actually been allocated towards entrepreneurial development, if you look at that again. So if we're really speaking of industrializing the country and really supporting the economy of the wealth creators, we need to ensure that probably some incentives are actually put in place. If you look at the stimulus package of the Ministry of Finance and the Social Security Program, that actually benefits employees. But what about the employers? And that's exactly what we are actually saying here. So I think it would actually be important that during this time, we give the support that is required to the wealth creators, because who would want to actually borrow money during this time? You know, in as much as the loan holidays are actually provided, there are those firms that may, consider doing that, but the majority in the SME sector themselves will actually be hesitant or scared to actually add to more debts that they actually already have. And what they want is to actually see that there is actually some incentives that is pumped into resuscitating the economic activities actually. That is very critical.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, no, definitely. And also in aid of the hardest hit economies, the Institute of Chartered Accountants have also contributed to the Minister of Finance in terms of possible tax relief measures. Unfortunately, to this date, none of that have came through. But there is, on the one side of the coin, there is assisting businesses in the times that they find themselves in. And on the other side, there is the importance of protecting the tax base of the country. Mr. Mangunda, we are concluding with our discussion this morning. In conclusion, would you say some of the opportunities for our economy, what would you say are some of the opportunities that our leaders should definitely focus on going forth?
Yeah, I think the first one maybe is to start off is to agree with what the Honourable Minister said when he said that this is not the time to introduce new taxes. In fact, I will venture to suggest that we do not have a revenue problem with our revenue to GDP ratio being at about 30%. What I do believe we do have is we have a big public expenditure problem. We have a economic growth problem. We've got a SOE governance and performance problem. We've got a housing problem. We've got an inequality problem, and we've got an unemployment problem. And these are fundamental structural problems that were there before COVID, that are there and actually inform some of the challenges that we had before COVID. We will need, and I think maybe just before that is that COVID has actually taught us something, and that's I think credit to the state and also to the Honorable Minister as well, is that the state can come up with a plan very quickly, implement a plan very, very quickly, coordinated, and done that urgently, particularly if you make reference to the disbursements of the emergency income grant. So it is possible. And what it also actually does indicate is that obviously this was quite a kind of a Marshall Plan that was very well coordinated, and we are a reference point as a country in terms of how we've dealt with the health, but also with the livelihoods at the same time as well in a very, very quick manner. And I believe that these other big problems that we have, these are fundamental problems, and they will need fundamental structural reforms in the form of Marshall or grand plans for these plans for these issues to be really dealt with in a coordinated but on an urgent basis. And I believe that this is probably the time, I think as a country and as a state, to have Marshall plans for each of these big challenges that we have.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Mangunda. Mrs. Muya, we are concluding. So in your opinion, as a representative of the national body NCCI, how do we navigate the next 2 to 3 years to provide that firm foundation which Namibia needs to just rebuild our economy?
I think it's a given that there are certain things that we can actually do, and they really do not require a lot of efforts. For example, the much eroded manufacturing sector. There are just certain simple things that you can do. You saw already when they had to actually give the material support, old material support from Ramatex, and those were actually lying there for over a decade. Why were they not actually given to fledgling enterprises as opposed to just wait until COVID is there, and it was actually done within 2 weeks? The other thing is it's critical that we have to obviously broaden our industrial base and make sure that we support the locals in terms of plant and incentives that are actually required to resuscitate or revive the economy. You cannot actually build an industrial economy if you do not put realistic incentives in place. And that's exactly what I still alluded to, that the allocation of the line ministry that is expected to drive industrialization there needs to be relooked at as well. So it's our appeal to Honorable Minister of Finance that, maybe the coming into being of the trade board, where particularly the SME sector will actually be falling under, that we really look at how we can really beef the support that is required to really broaden or accelerate our industrial activities. Otherwise, in the current environment that we are operating is actually challenged. Also, with the civil service, we appeal to them that with what is happening now, it calls really for real effective service delivery. Ensure that you provide the right service to business, you facilitate, you guide, and you support, as opposed to be spenders of the government revenue.
Yeah. Do you think the announced special economic zones will aid this drive?
Again, it will also depend on what exactly mechanisms government is actually willing to put in place. Because, I think we shouldn't shy away from starting something and having, speculations that if we do this, probably, people will actually, divert from what they are expected to do. We need to provide that support, start something, and then you see exactly what the results will do.
Yes.
And we believe that if we actually do that, we will see a Namibia that we all actually want to see.
Yes.
Industrialized, yes.
Definitely. Thank you for that, Ms. Muya. To our viewers, there you have it. Food for thought from experts from commerce and industry. Please stay online as we are about to dive into a one-on-one question and answer session by reporter Denver Kisting with our Honourable Minister Shiimi.
Thank you to Ms. Hasselman, Mr. Mngunda, and Ms. Muya for a very thought-provoking conversation about the budget. Mr. Shiimi, good to have you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be here, Denver.
I'm sure if one Googles the term baptism of fire, your name and your photo would pop up. How have the last 9 weeks of your life been?
I won't be lying to you. It has been hectic. We are on the battlefield, fighting COVID on one side, at the same time trying to formulate a budget in a very difficult environment. But you know, we will have to survive this, and with the support that I have received from all my colleagues, one of them is here, and all other Namibians, we have been able to cope.
And we know that essentially having to strike a balance between salvaging livelihoods, saving lives is not an easy balance to strike. And I'm sure the Ministry of Health and Social Services, as well as the Ministry of Education, Arts and Culture, are very grateful for what you allocated to those ministries. But it was raised earlier and it remains a very contentious issue. Why do we keep on giving defense such a huge chunk? We are not at war with anybody.
I think, Denver, when we look at the budget of defense, we need to look at the history. Where did we come from? Of course, we came from a situation of the liberation struggle. We had soldiers who have been trained before independence. So all those soldiers had to be incorporated in the defense of Namibia. Our current president, when he was a prime minister, actually used to call it a peace dividend, where you integrate those who were in the South African army and the plant fighters into one force, a Namibian defense force. That added to the number of people that we have there. And therefore, as a result, we actually have a sizable number of people in our defense system. And therefore, it's not something that you can deal with within a day. It's something that needs a responsible way of restructuring our personnel, because about 90% of the money actually goes to personnel expenditure. And you can't just wake up today and say, I'm no longer going to spend this amount of money on defense, because that means sending people home. And again, as I said before, you are going to add to the army of people who are already being unemployed, and that has got some other social consequences as well. So that's a context in which we need to look at the expenditure of defense. When I talk about the salary bill, defense is definitely one of the big ticket items that we need to look at.
But you know, we have been singing that song for quite some time now, that we need to tackle our very huge wage bill. I heard you say earlier that it needs to be done responsibly, it needs to be done in a sustainable manner. But when are we going to start? There are people in this economy who have really lost their jobs because of the impact of COVID-19 on the economy. There are many people who've had to take pay cuts in the private sector. But why is the private sector bearing the brunt alone? What are government employees actually doing about it?
Well, I think when you said when are we going to start, I think the truth is that we have started. We have started already by freezing positions. Already over the past 2 years or so, many positions in government were frozen. So only critical positions were really filled. But of course, we have to do that in a responsible way to make sure that basic government services are still being extended, because the state has to run. So it's not something that you can do in a very short period of time. But what we are saying now, in earnest, apart from just freezing position, we actually need to look at the structure of government. Look at each and every specific ministry and say, how many people should this ministry have? How many people should defense have? And then work, as people retire, work towards that structure. So that will take a bit of time. So we need to give ourselves a bit of time to be able to arrive at that destination where we want to have an ideal structure for public service. So, but that has started. That journey has started. The pace is going to be faster of reforming. I think we need to be a bit more patient on that. It's not easy. Expenditure is not always easy as, it doesn't fall as fast as revenue. Revenue falls immediately. Expenditure takes a bit of time because we have to readjust. It touches other people's livelihoods. But definitely what I can tell you is that the commitment is there to do something about the wage bill.
You're on record, and so is your predecessor, Mr. Schleitwein, that we need to work on making our spending more productive. It needs to add value ultimately. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, sir. In the budget speech, you have talked about efficiency of spending. And that's certainly a priority going forward in terms of making sure that if we spend money on health, are we getting value for money there? If we're spending money on education, are we getting value for money there? So those kind of deep analysis will start, and we hope that with those deep analysis, we are going to gain some savings, reallocate those savings to other sectors.
In the same vein, and I don't want to belabor the point, what we spend on the defense must also add value to our economy ultimately.
I thought you have already talked about defense. But let me also say, because I think when I delivered the budget speech, I actually didn't thank the defense, because I think our security forces are actually doing a wonderful job during this COVID-19. And sometimes when we look at defense and the security forces, we talk about that, that sector as if it's not a very important sector. But I hope that the conversation is not about we don't need a defense, because right now, defense is doing a wonderful job, and I want to thank them,
yes,
together with the police, because they are really helping us to ensure that there's law and order in the country.
Absolutely.
I think the conversation should be what should be the right size, not whether we need defense or not. We certainly need defense. And I think they're doing a wonderful job now.
I concur with you. They're helping us comply with the very important regulations.
Yeah.
So the current tax incentive program ending June 2020 was put in place to encourage taxpayers to register on the new ITIS platform. Are we making any inroads in that, and has it been successful thus far?
I think that journey has started. A number of people, fortunately, have registered on ITIS. We want more people to register on ITIS. I believe it's just a question of starting. Many people are afraid of registering, but I believe it's an easy process. So we all need to register. E-services, that's going to be the future. And all of us need to start getting used to those kind of infrastructure, to those kind of services, so that we become better at or become more efficient as a nation. Because if we are engaging or using these platforms, it means we are going to save time, we are going to save money, and we are going to become more productive as a country.
So it's no secret that we're struggling with inequality 30 years down the line from independence. But there was an emphasis in your budget speech and in the budget to strengthen our social safety nets. Please touch on that. Also speaking about old age pension, etc., please.
Yeah, the social safety net, Denver, it's very important for our vulnerable members of the society, because those are people who need the support of the state. And therefore unfortunately, we don't have enough resources to continue increasing that, or to increase the contribution to the pension funds, or provision for the pension funds and the vulnerable children. But we have kept those benefits the same. They have not been reduced, because we believe that's a first line of defense, especially during these difficult times where households get affected by somebody losing a job, or people who were selling their capanas are no longer able to sell their capanas or their tomatoes in the street. So all these informal traders have been somehow affected by COVID-19, and therefore having that safety net is very, very critical. So that's why we have actually not touched that when it comes to reducing any expenditure. And going forward, we will want to continue keeping that. But what is important in reducing inequality is not only the safety net, because the safety net gives you the bare minimum. What is important in addressing inequality is really to create higher paying jobs in the private sector, not in government, because government, as I said before, we need to right size. In the private sector, we need to find a way to get out of the private sector, to grow the economy, and grow the economy in such a way that the economy is going to provide quality jobs. Because we have jobs in the private sector, but a sizable number of these jobs are paying 1,500. So Denver and I are not in that category. We'll pay, we get a higher salary. And therefore, to close this gap, it means we need to push those ones who are at the bottom of that segment. That's the only way we can reduce inequality.
Although Denver's salary is slightly less than your salary.
Oh, really? How do you know?
It's a good inference that I can draw from the current circumstances. So we do know that a few years ago we received the shocking news that Namibia was classified as a tax haven. In the meantime, the EU finance ministers removed Namibia from the bloc's blacklist of tax havens after Namibia committed itself to changing its tax rules and practices. Now, we do know that an amendment bill has been issued for the proposed enactment on the removal of manufacturing incentives and the repealing of certain sections in the Export Processing Zones Act. That's number 9 of 1995. However, what is the time frame on the enactment of the bill and the implementation of the special economic zones?
The bill was passed by Parliament either towards the end of last year or beginning of this year. It's now waiting for approval by the National Council. So, as you know, Parliament was in recess because of COVID-19. We believe the National Council will probably start opening soon, and with the opening of the National Council, we are hoping that the bill is going to be passed by the National Council and therefore be signed into bill by the President soon thereafter.
So we have any indication in terms of time frame?
So that depends on the schedule of the National Council. I'm yet to engage the National Council to understand when are they going to open. So with the National Assembly opening, I'm hoping that the National Council will also follow soon. So as soon as that happens, we hope to see the bill passed by the National Council. So I believe within the next month or so, we should see the National Council opening.
Thanks. I would like us to take one slight step back relating to ITAS and the teething problems that have been experienced, although implementation has started. Bearing all of those in mind, is the ministry considering extending the current tax incentive program?
Incentive in such a, what do you have in mind? That
where penalties are,
where the
are
penalties
not
are being waived.
applicable as long as you register on the system, etc.
Yeah, so that's not a discussion that we have had yet. As I said, we were on the battlefield. We were really fighting COVID together with, COVID on the health side and on the economic side. So when the situation stabilizes, we'll have to go back to the drawing board and see whether we need to extend the incentives that are there, or how do you engage? How are we going to engage the taxpayers to make them understand that it's their responsibility to pay tax? So we still have a significant number of outstanding tax payments, and we will want to engage with those fellow Namibians to understand why they are not paying tax and understand how do we help them to pay tax. So that's something that we're going to focus on going forward.
I hear empathy and compassion on your part. I'm very grateful to hear that.
But then?
I hear empathy and compassion on your side.
Yes, empathy and compassion is always with us as the Minister of Finance. We really want to walk that journey with our taxpayers, but we also want our taxpayers to understand that they have a moral duty and a national duty to pay tax.
And a legal duty.
And a legal duty, of course. If I wanted to start with a soft side first,
yes,
before we send the police to them to go and arrest them, because it's definitely a legal issue, and therefore there are legal consequences. But what is important is to understand that they have a moral duty, they have a national duty to pay tax, and hopefully, if they get that message, we will not get to the third duty.
Let's please not overburden the police force. They've got their hands full at the moment, Honourable
Definitely.
Minister. Yes.
That's why it's important for us to pay tax willingly.
Absolutely. In all fairness, you've only been with the ministry for the past 9 weeks, as you've said a couple of times. However, the tax amendments under consideration are not favourable to taxpayers, specifically relating to local shareholders' dividends tax, trust beneficiaries, the taxing of charitable and religious organizations. We're talking about churches here as well as asset management companies. Now, it has been at least 2 years since these tax amendments were announced, creating uncertainty amongst those affected human beings. Why is there that uncertainty, and what is being done about it?
Well, I think there were a number of tax proposals that were made then, that time. Of course, the situation was different. Some of them, as we have heard, we have announced in the budget speech that some of those proposals, or at least one of them, has been withdrawn. That is the non-deductibility of royalties by mining companies, that we have withdrawn. As we have said in the budget speech, that this is not time to increase tax, but the tax that is due has to be paid. I have also equally said in the budget speech that those are proposals that are on the ground. Some of them, there are probably merits to look at them. Some of them, they may be no longer be relevant during this time. We'll go back to the drawing board, and that's an announcement we have made and a committee we have made. We'll go back to the drawing board to analyze and assess whether those tax amendments are still relevant. But of course, if somebody is getting money, getting an income, and that income should be taxed, that income should be taxed. So that will be the principle. And of course, taxing dividends is not something that is unique to Namibia. Even our neighbor here in South Africa, I think they tax dividends. So, but we will have to look at the merits and demerits of all those. As I have promised, our approach is very consultative. We will consult with with our fellow Namibians. We will listen to them. We will listen to them. Or we will take their input into account before we make a final decision.
We'll hold you to account as far as those promises are concerned.
Certainly, you should do that.
Very well. I'm happy that you're touching on the issue of disallowing the tax deductibility of royalties for mining entities in order to encourage investor confidence and reinvestment here in the beautiful land of the brave. Currently, a lot of entities in the mining and exploration industry are struggling to get their VAT refunds paid out to them. Those are the undisputed ones that Ms. Hisselman also referred to during the discussion. This could, of course, discourage reinvestment in Namibia. Should this also not perhaps be a priority for you and your ministry?
Certainly, it's a priority for us. We have made a commitment that we are going to pay out outstanding invoices. By that time, we counted 1.2 billion when we made that announcement. we have settled that bill completely, so we have paid out all the outstanding invoices as we are talking now. We also made a commitment that we are going to pay out VAT that is outstanding, or the VAT claims that are outstanding. And by that time, we counted 3 billion. So far, we have paid about 2 billion of that. So we're making progress. But what I also need to appeal to my fellow Namibians is that, paying out VAT and outstanding invoices follow certain processes. And these processes are put in place to ensure that there's no fraud, to ensure that money is going to the right beneficiaries, those who are claiming are the right people who should, or those claims are genuine and legitimate. So there's a process there. So if you short-circuit that process, or you take shortcuts, you may be compromising yourself. So to increase the speed, it also means that you need to go back to those processes. So we have, as I have mentioned in the budget speech, we are now looking at those processes to see how do we streamline our processes to ensure that we ensure speed of first processing those claims and pay those claims. So we will come back to the public probably within the next 2 months or so as to how far we have gone in terms of streamlining our processes and the commitment that we'll be making in terms of payment. So, but there has been significant progress. As I said, outstanding invoices have been paid. VAT, or more than half, has been paid already. So we're making progress in that regard. But we want to see a higher speed, especially in terms of reducing the VAT claims.
For the past 12 weeks out of the 9 weeks, there was one amount on all Namibians' lips, it appeared. That amount is 750. Just very briefly, how did that process go and what is still outstanding?
So far, we have paid about 750,000 Namibians. And that was more or less our estimate when we looked at the statistics of people who are eligible.
750,000.
Yeah, more than 500,000 have been paid. There are still those who have not received their money yet, and so that figure stands at about 120,000. So certainly we are going to exceed our budget because more people. It looks like that there are more people who are legitimately qualifying to benefit from this. Now, why are there still outstanding people, or people who have not been paid? We are suspecting some frauds in the system, and therefore we had to make sure that only people who qualify to benefit from this scheme get the money. So we had to institute a verification process. So there were people, for instance, you find an ID that is used by 3 or 5 applications. So those people we had to verify. And the verification had to be physical. You must come, show your ID, show that you are a real person. That's one. There was also people, or there were also people who have used more people have used one phone, and there could also be some fraud there. So we said, although it was allowed to use more, for people to use more people to use one phone, we then said, if you have used one phone and you are more than 3 of you must be verified. You must go to your counselor, go and show your ID for us to ensure that you are a real person who exists. So that's the process that we engaged in and it concluded last week. We are now busy entering the data, and now once that process is finalized, we will start doing the payment again. So we are hoping within the next 3 weeks or so, we will come to conclude this whole process. So Namibians, we want to appeal to them to be a patient, but we also want to thank them for being patient as well.
Is it fair to say that the number of applications received being more than you expected and anticipated is an indication of the dire straits faced by our fellow countrymen and women?
Certainly, yeah. Certainly. Of course, during COVID, even those who had a livelihood have lost their livelihood. and therefore they became part of that number that needs additional support. Yeah, and probably because the number that we use, it came from the national census, the National Income and Household Survey that NSA conducted some years ago.
Thank you.
And some of those numbers, so they were not part of that statistics. So that I think that explains the shortfall in our estimate.
Thank you. I wish we had more time to talk about this very important, not only document, but also, the way we spend our money, what money we have to spend, etc. Just very finally, I'm going to share two statements with you, and I'd like to hear your response to it. Mr. Mgunda from Standard Bank Namibia referred to it as well. We've had many structural problems in this country prior to COVID-19.
Yeah.
So there is a fear that government might be hiding behind COVID-19 not to deal with these actual problems. What's your response to that, very briefly?
No, I think there's a genuine commitment from government to reform. I think COVID-19 has just underlined the need to speed up that process. And I think all of us in government understand that message, that speed needs to increase. As I said before, these structural issues are not easy to fix in a very short space of time. You can't fire people just today. You're going to create unrest. That's one. You also need to be focused, because if you're fighting too many battles at the same time, you're actually going to be defeated. There's this analogy that I always follow, that you can't chase two hares or rabbits at the same time. So if you are chasing two rabbits at the same time, you will not catch any of them, because this one will move in that direction, the other rabbit will move in that direction, then you move from this direction to that direction. So one will have to focus and look at what is the situation at hand now. For the past few weeks, the situation at hand was to stabilize COVID, to make sure that lives are saved. Now, if that stability continues, I think we'll have more time and resources to look at the deep issues that need deep analysis and deep reforms. So that will definitely be the focus of our strategy going forward.
Dr. Shiimi Tapandula Unene, and best of luck.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me here.
There you have it, our brand new Minister of Finance, Iipumbu Shiimi, from the horse's mouth, sharing exactly where we're at and where we are headed. Stay tuned. Thank you, dear viewer, for staying with us here on our broadcast called Budget Transparency. As we wrap up the broadcast today, I'm joined by Ms. Monique Kluter, Managing Director at Liberty Life Namibia, for the vote of thanks. Good morning, ma'am, and welcome.
Thank you, Denver, and good morning to you and good morning to our viewers. So thank you very much for the opportunity to deliver the closing remarks for this event with the Honourable Iipumbu Shiimi. I think it is apt to thank our sponsors at this point in time: Namibia Media Holdings, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Standard Bank Namibia, Liberty Life Namibia, and the NCCI. I think it's also opportune for us to thank our panelists, the Minister of Finance and our panelists, for making the time available to actually be part of this annual highlight for us. The COVID-19 pandemic has impacted us in many different ways, and for a lot of us it is financial. So I think it's apt to spend a bit of time just chatting about that. And we've seen the national budget themed together defeating COVID-19 together thriving again. And I think that the budget has been set up to really assist Namibians through these unprecedented times that we're facing. We've seen that with the additional allocations to the Ministry of Health and Social Services, as well as the Ministry of Education, Arts and Culture. I think the once-off economic income grants and the VAT refunds will definitely provide additional stimulus to the economy as well. His Excellency the President yesterday indicated that Namibians should not think COVID-19 no longer exists as we move to stage 3 under the state of emergency. And I think as Namibia, we need to accept that this is our new normal. We've made a number of advancements over the years in specifically I refer to ICT. And I think that's something that we as Namibians need to be very proud of and need to demonstrate so that we can compete globally and really use those advancements to our advantage from a global perspective. As highlighted by the Minister, we too at Liberty Life believe that financial education is key in driving particularly the situation that a lot of our communities now face with the impact of COVID-19. We see this type of education as really assisting our communities, the communities in which we operate, and we are raising our hand to really be there for our society through a digital financial literacy program that we have available. And we're very positive, not because we believe that Namibia will come out of this unscathed, but we do believe that the battle scars will be accompanied by lessons. And we believe that by the end of the year, that our country's mindset and the culture will have changed and will have shifted for the better. We believe that we will become swifter as a nation in our actions and our policy framework. That was mentioned by the Minister as well. Our health systems, local governance, and engagement levels will no doubt be enhanced. And because of this, we see a silver lining around this dark cloud that we currently face. Thank you very much, viewers, for sharing your morning with us. And Namibians, please do continue to keep yourselves and your families safe.
Ms. Klute, allow me to say thank you for saying thanks to us.
Not a problem. Thank you, Denver.
Very well. We need to all please accept responsibility for doing our part to strengthen government's efforts to help not only fight this invisible enemy, but to help strengthen our economy. From me, Denver, kissing all of us here at Budget Transparency, it's goodbye. Have a safe and good weekend.